First, for a geopolitical reason, that fascism was in struggle against Great Britain, that was the landlord of Middle East in that time, and so they want to put a problem inside the Great Britain domination. But there was also another kind of problem, that fascism was
That's the sound of fascism.
Of course, they are reacting in some way.
Yeah. Hi everybody, this is Laith Marouf and you're watching Free Palestine TV, and we are in the port of Civitavecchia, and this is just outside Rome. As you can see, the weather is not cooperating with us today. But we have with us a special guest, Alberto Fazolo, who is a journalist from Italy, and we are here to talk about the history of this port, a relationship between Zionism and fascism. It's a long history of resistance to also both Zionism and fascism in this port. Alberto, to start our viewers, there's a story that probably a lot of people don't know, which is that Jabotinsky, one of the ultra-fascist Zionists, which is an oxymoron, all Zionists are fascist, who is the father of the Likud party, which Netanyahu belongs to, had set up here a naval base to train some of the Zionists. Tell us about this story.
So, Italy have a long story of helping the fascist movement all around the world, because fascism rise up first time in Italy and want to help fascism all around the world to take the power, to make an international fascist network. And in this way, start to training diverse group and saboteur all around the world. The most famous case is the Russian Ustasha, and but there was something like this all around the Mediterranean area, but also in some other parts of the world, in East Europe and so on. And what they do? They give political support, political training, and military training and military support. To do what? To do a regime change, today we call it. And they try to do it in several ways, but not every time it worked. And why fascism helped the Zionists to find their countries? First, for a geopolitical reason, that fascism was in struggle against Great Britain, that was the landlord of Middle East in that time, and so they want to put a problem inside the Great Britain domination. But there was also another kind of problem, that fascism was
That's the sound of fascism.
Of course, they are reacting in some way.
Yeah.
It was a movement that took the power in Italy, also with the support of Zionists and Jew groups, because Mussolini was coming from Socialist Party, and he put together a group of revolutionaries. Some of them was coming from the left, was socialist and so on. But the step that make the change was when Mussolini take an agreement with the industrial and commercial groups and the powers. And in these powers there was also several Jews that support the rise up of fascists and help them to take the power in the country. So Mussolini wants to give back something to these people. And it was also before the 1938, because after 1938 the situation will sharply changed. Because, as I say to you, Mussolini was fully supported by Zionists, and there was also some Jews that have a top position inside the fascist organization. For example, in the city of Livorno, the Gerarca, that was something like a mayor, but in a fascist way, so means that it's not a democratic mayor, it's a fascist that rules the town. So in that town, the Gerarca was a Zionist, and was the most ridiculous things that happened, but there was a strong relationship between fascists and Jews. It works properly till 1938 because in that time Mussolini had to change his politics inside the country. I mean that Adolf Hitler asked Mussolini to put some new rules that called racial laws against the Jews. And so there was a contradiction for Mussolini because one of the most important groups that support him to take the power have to put outside of the law. So he needed to give to them an exit strategy. And the exit strategy was to give to them a state, and the state was inside Palestine. So, double goal, give the exit strategy to them and make a problem to the Great Britain. And that's why in this place fascists helped political and military, give political and military training to the Zionists to make the state inside Palestine.
So they did this, of course, it's considered the beginnings of the Zionist Navy in this base. And there's this story goes once the war starts, as you said, and now they want to push the Jews out to Palestine. There's that confrontation that happens between them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Explain it a little bit more.
So, what I mean, the contradiction that started in that time was that the story was quite similar in Italy and Germany. And what I mean is the Jews give some Jewish groups give a strong support to the parties that take the power, and they have to kick out them. And the solution was surely not a good solution for both. And so Mussolini and Hitler, in the first time, tried to find an easier solution. So only to the richest people, because we are talking about fascists, so they don't care about poor people. We are talking about agreement between fascists and Nazi and the richest part of the Jewish bourgeoisie in this country. They find to them opportunity to go away, to go far and to save some of their richness. And this is the main conflict that started between them, because there was a conflict between fascists and Nazis on one side and Jewish in the other side. But there was also class struggle inside the Jewish, because the traitor of the bourgeoisie let the poor people to be killed by the Nazi and the fascists.
We know the Nazis, everywhere they went, they outlawed all the Jewish organizations that used to be representing the Jewish community, and they appointed the World Zionist Organization as the sole representative of the Jews in whatever country they occupy. And we know also that clearly most of the Jews that died in the concentration camps were anti-Zionist. And of course, there was the trains that the Germans gave to the Zionists to go to occupied Palestine. Sometime through, at one point in the war, when the Allies were clearly gonna win, the Zionists seem to have flipped sides. Tell us about the beginnings of this and the Jewish battalion that joined the British in their invasion of Italy.
Yeah, during the Second World War, Britain was in huge problems, and they tried to let join to the army all of the people from their empire. And they tried several times to do it also in Palestine. And they set up a first battalion called the Palestine Battalion that was mixed between Arabs and Jewish. But it didn't work because it was on voluntary stuff, and no one in that land wanted to die for the king. And so the war was going on, and the Palestine battalion was very little and used only for police action in Palestine. But the most interesting thing is that this was the first step of set up the IDF. What I mean, that in that time, few Jews joined this Palestine battalion just to steal weapons and to hide explosives and weapons to use against Palestinians. So they joined the war, but not to make a war against Nazi, but to build up their army in the future. So later, the United Kingdom see that the Palestinian regiment was not working, and also because the people inside was not agree one with each other. And so, a few time later, they tried to set up a new project, a project that was proposed by the Zionist International Conference, that was to set up a only Jewish battalion, the Jewish Brigade was called. And but the problem is that it happened in the last part of the war, almost in the end. And when the United Kingdom give permission to set up this battalion, they arrived to Italy, in the south part of the Italy, but in that time the south part of Italy was free from Nazi and Fascists, because there was allies, so British and American, that take the full control of the area. So when I arrived here in Italy, it was in 1944, the Jewish battalion didn't fight till 1 month before the end of the war. And I must remember to you that in Italy the war was not finished like all of the rest of Europe in May 9 of 1945, but in April 25 of 1945. And so they joined the war in the last months, just in the spring of 1945, and this is very interesting to note that they decided to start the combat after that there was the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp that was in January 27 of 1945. So if all of the people all around the world acted like the Jewish Brigade, the Holocaust will be total. All of the world will speak German now. Yeah. And so that shows clearly how was their opportunistic approach, which was their true goal. The goal was not to set free the people of Europe, was not to protect the Jews of Europe, but was only to build up the Israeli state. And it was very interesting what said Ben Gurion about this. He said, if I will be able to save all of the Jewish kids in Europe, or I have the opportunity to take only some of them in Israel, I prefer to save only few of them in Israel. And so that shows what is the true approach. This is the true nature of the Israeli state. And
in the areas that this Jewish brigade came into control, what was their main role? Because most of these villages were destroyed. Their TV, there was no TV, their radios, their printing. What was the role that they played the biggest part in?
So, when the Jewish Brigade arrived in Italy, our country was just coming, the south part was coming out from a terrible war. There was shelling from British and Americans, not from Germany. And most of the city was destroyed. There was not electricity, there was no two-way communication, there was no newspaper. People was very poor, they don't also have the radio. So they didn't know what was happening in the world. And they started to do political activity, and they started to do propaganda and bad information about situation just to drive consensus to the setup of Israel. And the other very important things, they started to build a network because they arrived in the city with Airbus, and the Airbus that was inside the communication network of British warship structure, and so they start to put the network to drive the Jewish people from the Europe to the Palestine, and it happened during the war. So they don't care about the solution, the victory in the war. They start for the beginning when they arrived here, just to mind to keep the people in Palestine. And it was also against the agreements and the rules that there was in that time, because all of us, we know very well that there was an agreement to split off Palestine and to give to Israeli a state inside Palestine. It's not a secret. But there was an agreement to respect some number of people that have to go there. And the Israelis, since the beginning, don't want to respect this agreement, like they don't respect any other agreement. And it is a good lesson also for peace agreement that someone wants to do now.
Okay, we're going to just try to move from here because we're getting a little bit wet, and find a little bit better place, and we'll finish this conversation. Okay. Shit, my socks are wet now.
No, me too. Never mind on this.
So we talked a little bit about the history pre the war, and as the Zionist colony was being created, but that even after the fall of the fascist government, there was a continued relationship between the Italian government and the Zionists. Tell us about the military cooperation between the two.
Okay, there is an official story and an unofficial story. But first of all, we have to talk about the situation after any war. You have the problem of a lot of former soldiers that are not able to go back inside the society, that they have some problem of relationships, and or simply they are not able to do anything different than fight. And any government after the war finds some solution for them, and sometimes are good solution, sometimes bad solution.
So we're talking about the soldiers that were in the fascist military.
Yes.
And they needed to find a solution for them, just like they tried to find a solution for the Nazis and put them in the NATO.
Not all of them was able to go back in the NATO, because people that fought very strongly against Americans will never want to go under the rules of Americans inside the NATO. And so for this kind of people, the Italian government find some different solutions, some unofficial actions. And one of that, the most interesting for us, was of some people that was coming from one of the most efficient military groups from the Navy, that was called the Decima Mas, that was a group that was first under the fascist government, and after they start to serve for the Germany. And after the war, these people that, of course, they take part of Holocaust or in Shoah, starts to help Israel. And you know better than me that doesn't exist really a former soldier. A soldier is a soldier forever. And so when these people freely, without any national support of Italy or in the official story arrived to Israel, they give their support and start to give their skills to the newborn IDF. But was not exactly in the IDF, because these people was coming from the Navy. They was Navy SEALs. They was expert in attacks in the sea and submarine attacks with scuba divers. And they start to give this training. And it happens in a moment where the other part of the Palestine was still under the problem of the set up a new way after the Second World War, because of course there was not fight there, but it was very difficult to set up the state. And so these people give a huge effort to the Israeli to avoid that there was the born of the Palestine state. And I think that is a criminal action that officially doesn't touch the Italian government, but to be honest, I think that we are fully involved in it, like we were involved in the Second World War, because the easy way for people to approach this kind of problem, that it's a very complex problem, is simply to try to forget, never mind on things, and go on. So we Italians were guilty for all of the atrocity of Second World War, but we are guilty also for everything happened after the war.
It's obviously a lot of people don't understand these complexities, and this is why it's easier to manipulate them. But for me, as a Palestinian, I see the Zionists as not only responsible for the Holocaust in Palestine, but partially responsible for the Holocaust that happened to the Jewish people in Europe. And the elite in Europe as a whole were also part of the problem then and now, as we see with Italy continuing today to supply the Zionists with weapons and diplomatic cover and legal cover. Alberto, thank you very much for this historic tour of the relationship between the Zionists and the Fascists in Italy, and the continuing relationship with that. We've taken a lot of your time, and I ask you one more time to press the subscribe button on whatever social media platform you're watching this on, and to go to our website, freepalestine.video, to donate so we can continue bringing you this content. Behind the camera is Rabih Ghannam, and until we see you next time, I bid you all a free Palestine and an Italy free of fascism, capitalism and imperialism.
Free Palestine!